Stick around because today I'm going to teach you how to show and tell in your stories. What's up, guys? My name is Brandon McNulty. I'm a writer, I'm the author of Bad Parts, and welcome to my writing channel. About a year ago I did a video on the subject of show, don't tell. And I had a problem with show, don't tell. It's this piece of writing advice that a lot of instructors like to force on their students and younger writers and newer writers. Basically what a lot of writing teachers say is that you should show details in your stories, but you should never tell your audience how to think or how to feel or anything like that. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the terms of showing and telling, I'll give you a quick overview real quick before we get into the meat of this video. Basically, showing involves giving your audience objective details, things that they could potentially see on a movie screen or hear through movie speakers. Now, when we're talking about showing details, we're talking about showing sensory details, or showing actions being taken, or showing dialogue that is spoken, or showing relevant character thoughts. Now, on the other hand, you have telling, and when you're telling the audience something, you're giving them details that may not be relevant, or they may be biased in some way or another. Some examples of telling might include things like exposition and backstory, or it might include things like labeling emotion. For instance, you can tell the audience someone is furious, or you can show that person being red-faced and stomping around the house and punching walls. And then one other example would be labeling traits. For instance, you might have a character that you just say is intelligent, as opposed to showing that character maybe solving a complicated math problem on a chalkboard or something like that. Now, it's important to remember that both showing and telling serve a valuable purpose in your stories. Both have advantages and disadvantages. With showing has the benefit of enabling your audience to think for themselves and to see the story as it's happening and to get all the concrete objective details. Telling, on the other hand, has the advantage of speeding up your story and cutting out a lot of thick and heavy details that you may not want in there, that you may not want bogging down the story. Now, last year, after I did that video on how show don't tell is a sham, a lot of my viewers reached out to me and they said, "Hey Brandon, that was a great video, it really helped, but I wish you had included some examples." And today I have some examples for you, and they come from a book that maybe you've heard of. It's called Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And of course you've heard of this book. Pretty much every literate person on the planet has heard of it. It's wildly popular. The series was hugely successful. And based on that advice of show don't tell, you would think that this book contains not a drop of telling. But today I want you to understand that the book actually opens up with 4 consecutive paragraphs that are almost entirely telling. So we're going to take a look at this. I'm going to break things down. I'm going to explain why things work. But first I want to read it for you just so we're on the same page. So I'm going to be reading the first couple pages of the book, and just so we're clear, I'm cutting out one long paragraph because I just want to keep this video as short as possible. But pay attention to the details in these opening paragraphs, and a lot of them involve telling. There is some showing going on here. I will point it out later in the video, but for now we're just going to read it. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Private Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal, thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was the director of a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on her neighbors. The Dursleys had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion there was no finer boy anywhere. And then we're going to skip that third paragraph just to keep things short. We're going to jump into the fourth paragraph, which goes, "When Mr. and Mrs. Dursley woke up on the dull gray Tuesday our story starts, there was nothing about the cloudy sky outside to suggest that strange and mysterious things would soon be happening all over the country. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie for work, and Mrs. Dursley gossiped away happily as she wrestled a screaming Dudley into his high chair. None of them noticed a large, tawny owl flutter past the window. At 8:30, Mr. Dursley picked up his briefcase, pecked Mrs. Dudley on the cheek, and tried to kiss Dudley goodbye, but missed because Dudley was now having a tantrum and throwing his cereal at the walls. Little tyke, chortled Mr. Dursley as he left the house. He got into his car and backed out of number 4's drive. It was on the corner of the street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar. A cat reading a map. And we'll end things there, and we'll go back and we'll take a look at each of these paragraphs that I read. So the first paragraph of the book is pure telling, and you would think, okay, that's the kiss of death. No way does Harry Potter get off the ground. But this paragraph works because it makes the reader curious. That first sentence, it mentions that they were perfectly normal, and just those words, perfectly normal, insinuate that things are going to get a little unnatural in this book. And just in case you weren't convinced by that, the second sentence adds the words strange and mysterious, which pop up again in the fourth paragraph. Strange and mysterious are what hint at things that are to come. It sets the tone for this story. It says that, listen, reader, this story is going to involve some magic, some mystery, some wacky things, so be prepared for it. And it also makes us curious because it doesn't tell us what exactly are these strange and mysterious things. Now the second paragraph is a mix of showing and telling. I'm going to highlight the showing parts in green and the telling parts in yellow just to distinguish the two. But as you can see, the majority of this paragraph is telling. There are some showing details, like when we get images of the characters, we get a big beefy man, he's got a large mustache, we get his wife who's thin and blonde, twice the usual amount of neck. But if you notice the end of her sentence after that amount of neck, we get some telling, which adds a little humor to the story and also paints a clear image of who she is as a person. And it's effective and it's to the point. Now, you could have potentially shown these details, but you would have to move her outside and you'd have to give us a scene where she is working outside and spying on her neighbors. Instead of doing that, we're just told about it, and we get a clear image of Mrs. Dursley, and we move along. Now, the third paragraph, although I skipped it, you can look at it on your own time if you want, and basically this one also includes a lot of telling details. But then we move on to the fourth paragraph. The fourth paragraph begins with a lot of telling. We're even reminded that we are being told this story with that line about how our story starts. Then later on in this paragraph, we do get some showing details. Mr. Dursley hums as he picks out his most boring tie for work. And I just want to point out that when we're told that it's the most boring tie, that is in fact telling. We are not shown what that tie looks like. We're just told that it's a boring tie. If you wanted to show us that it's like a checkered tie or something like that, you could do that, but we are instead just told that it's a boring tie. And this is done to show contrast between this boring Dursley family and the eventual magic of the world that we're going to be introduced to later on in the story. Now, the fifth paragraph is pure showing. None of them noticed a large tawny owl flutter past the window. We could easily see that on a screen if we wanted to. And then the sixth paragraph as well is pure showing. At 8:30, he picks up his briefcase, kisses his wife, and tries to kiss his son goodbye. Then there's a line of dialogue, which of course is showing, and then we see him leave the house and pull out of the driveway. All of that is shown to us. We can make our own inferences about it, whatever we want to do. Now, as for the seventh paragraph, I didn't read it to you in its entirety. I only read the opening line because I wanted to get that line in there about the cat reading a map. And that's important because it's the first detail that we are shown as being something unnatural and magical and weird. Now, some people might argue that this story should have started with J.K. Rowling showing us details instead of telling us details. You might even argue that we should begin the story with that fifth paragraph, the one about the owl flying past the window. And you could potentially begin the story that way, but if you did open up with that paragraph, none of them noticed a large tawny owl flutter past the window. That paragraph does not hint at the genre of this story. It does not hint that this is going to be a story about magic and unnatural things. Tawny owl fluttering past the window is just, it's just an everyday occurrence that could potentially happen anywhere where there are owls. And sure, it adds an element of mystery, and maybe you might even argue that it's ominous, but it doesn't hint at there being any magic in the story. And if you were to begin the story with that paragraph, and then move on to paragraph number 6 with Dursley going through his morning routine, and then if you moved on to that next paragraph where the cat is reading a map, that could potentially throw the reader off and take them out of the story because things are not properly hinted at. In the current way that Harry Potter is written, where we have, the original opening with hints at the strange and mysterious, and we're focusing heavily on the fact that the Dursleys are very normal and boring, that intro prepares us for some magical things going on in the story. So when we do get the cat reading the map, we're like, oh, okay, so here's something that's going on in this story. And I wonder what other kind of crazy things are going to be going on in this world. And then, of course, later on in the story, we do get to see what kind of wild and unnatural things are going on. But I think it's important to note that the opening to Harry Potter works well because there is a balance of showing and telling. We get both, and both work in different ways to keep us reading along and to keep us curious and to help introduce us to this world. And this is one of the more popular story worlds in all of fiction. So, I mean, keep that in mind. Next time someone says to you, show, don't tell, remind them that Harry Potter opens up with paragraphs that include a lot of telling. And that telling serves a purpose and it works well within the context of this particular story. So I hope this helps. Question of the day, what is your show to tell ratio? Is it 90-10? Is it 75-25? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you guys for watching. If you want to support the channel, please pick up a copy of Bad Parts if you haven't already. Also, be sure to check out my other videos, hit the like and subscribe buttons for me, share this video with a friend, and as always, remember to keep on showing and telling.